Hello, I'm Sharon Scott Wilson from Resort Trades. We're a media company, and we provide different ways for connecting you to other timeshare resort professionals in the community and send you current relevant information, whether it's in our print publication or one of our digital products. So today we're going to talk about how many timeshare resorts that were built decades ago are facing aging infrastructure, often an aging owner base, tight budgets, a lot of challenges. So Scott McGregor is going to walk us through practical steps a resort professional or HOA board can take to reimagine, as he puts it, an older property without overcommitting resources. So Scott is Executive Vice President and COO at Lemonjuice Capital Solutions. He has over 40 years of experience in project planning, development, marketing, and finance in the industry's very well qualified. So, Scott, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sharon. It's always a privilege to spend some time with you.
Today, one of our top topics is practical roadmaps for sustainability. So I guess the question would be, where do you start? How should an HOA board, a resort professional, begin evaluating a legacy property's condition? Do you have a framework that you can recommend?
And we do share. And some of the things that people think about are obvious and come first nature. But today, with the changing nature of the properties and everything else, there's some additional things I think that need to be thought about. Just stepping back from it's really an exciting time in the timeshare industry. It's a time of a lot of innovation and renewal. I mean, the timeshare industry has always been known for its innovation, but it's going through an innovative cycle right now about thinking about the future for a very changed owner base and a very changed condition of these legacy properties, as you said. Some of these properties that have been developed, it's a majority of the properties in the United States are at or beyond their original intended lifespan, and many of those properties have been redeveloped from something already. So it really is a remarkable time in the industry, but really a very positive one. There's a lot of good outcomes available for the owners, and it really is a time of renewal. So when a board or a management professional or even an owner is thinking about where their property is today and where it might go from here in the near and far term, I usually think of it in 5 different categories. And I think most people do, but some of these may be a little nuanced. The first is financial. Of course, everyone starts with their financials. They're looking at their cash flows. They're looking at their operating budgets. They're looking at their maintenance fees and wondering, how much the maintenance fees should go up this coming year. And I think most enlightened boards have gotten beyond the preconceived notion of trying to keep maintenance fees low, because they've realized that if they're not reinvesting properly in the properties, things start catching up with them more and more. So there's that. But then as you look forward, it's really thinking about the reserve and capital expenditures in a very different way. And most of the time we're looking 3 to 5 years. Yeah, our reserve studies may be 30 or 40 years in scope to consider the roofs and those big things. But this is now a time where we're really starting to add major infrastructure renewal to these capital improvement plans. We're not refinishing the pool. We may be replacing it. And we may be actually replacing the utilities in the wall and the major mechanical and plumbing systems within a property. So it is a different mindset when you're doing that financial thinking and planning going forward, because these are big ticket items and they require a lot of advanced planning and they require capital and often some creative financing, of course, to undertake them. Operations, everyone considers their operations. They think about their KPIs, what they want to achieve in terms of their scores, how they want to deliver a good vacation experience to their owners. But again, today, it goes well beyond that when you're thinking about operations. When you're thinking about your staff, very often, and even your boards of directors, we need to be thinking about succession planning. Very often, some of these resort managers have been here for 20 or 30 years, and they're thinking about retirement or moving on to doing something different. And same with some of the boards. So anticipating those changes and being prepared to figure out how to transfer all that institutional knowledge is definitely more of a issue these days in operational planning. Of course, technology really comes into play. Technology at the resort, making sure that there's enough bandwidth so that when it's full of families and they're all on their devices, you have the bandwidth to manage that. But it goes beyond that too. You think about rental distribution and using technology for inventory management and getting the inventory out there in the best possible manner, in electronic voting, in communicating with the owners. The one thing we all learned from COVID was how to use Zoom and technologies like this more effectively. And it's really been helpful in resort operations because it allows management, boards, and owners to be connected much more easily than in the past. And then the other big operations thing we think about these days is accessibility, and not so much ADA compliance. That's got its own unique flavor in the timeshare world, but just basic accessibility. We're all getting older, and being able to move through a property safely and effortlessly is more important to our entire traveling public than it ever was before. And there are just so many steps that can be taken to think through about removing trip hazards and small steps and just making things more accessible to the owners, that the owners and guests that are coming into your property that need and appreciate those types of things. So financial operations. The third big one is governance. So with these aging timeshare resorts come aging timeshare documents. Many of these declarations, CC&Rs, the bylaws, many of these documents were written 30 or 40 years ago or more, and really don't anticipate the modern era with technology, the changing way of the changing consumer demographics and preferences for communication, the ability to do electronic voting, and things of that nature. So as we're looking at our documents, it's an opportunity to think about those types of issues, maybe providing more flexible use plans that might be more appealing to a broader, younger audience going forward, or even as resorts are contemplating some change of their structure. It may be a right sizing, in which there's a partial termination of a timeshare plan and some of the property is converted to some other real estate use, condominium or hotel or multifamily, or even a full termination that may happen in the future. All of those things take time to think through. So governance is really front and center of one of the important things to be evaluating. One that we don't often talk about much that is really critical, we find in our world more so than ever before, is title. And that's understanding who owns every interest in the timeshare property, in the regime. And it's not just who the current owner is, but who are the past owners? Have we identified all of those title issues? And where does that come into play? Most will say, well, I don't really care as long as I'm getting my maintenance fee, but it really does come into play, because as you start addressing those governance issues, for example, we just talked about for a little bit, you need to make sure that the people voting are the people entitled to cast their votes, whether that's just to amend a document or actually to do one of those partial or full plan terminations that we discussed. You need to know who is the eligible party to vote And then if there's money that's going to get distributed of a partial sale, for instance, you need to know that that's going to the right party. If we're going to be financing some of these big infrastructure projects that we talked about a moment ago, you're going to probably need some sort of third-party financing. And again, they're going to want to know if you're using association inventory, for example, as collateral for that loan. They're going to want to know that you own it free and clear. And again, it's not just how did we get it from the last owner, but how did that owner get it from the owner before them and the owner before them. So really understanding that chain of title right back to the project's inception is more important than it ever was before. And then the fifth one is the most important by far, and it's talked about, but I think often overlooked, and that's really finding out what the owners want. So we all do surveys. The thing about finding out what the owners want is you need to learn from the people that aren't responding to the surveys. The people that respond to the surveys are the ones that are engaged. They're either positively, sometimes negatively engaged, right? They want to speak their mind about something, but they're at least reading the emails and they're participating. People that haven't paid a maintenance fee in the last year or so that don't respond to that survey often represent a very significant percentage of those owners, and it may be a large enough percentage that it will affect any of the decisions you try to make in terms of governance. So finding ways to reach out to the people that aren't the most responsive and most engaged is really, it's a hard thing to do, but it is super critical. And once re-engaged, they also appreciate the opportunity to participate more in the decisions about the future of their timeshare and of their resort. The other thing by engaging the owners, like I say, our industry is going through remarkable innovation and figuring out how to repurpose these properties, how to come up with new and more interesting products to vacation ownership interested people than we have in the past. Innovation is alive and flourishing. Unfortunately, that innovation also is alive in the negative side, the scams that affect timeshare owners that are preying on these older owners predominantly about scaring them about getting out of their timeshare and things of that nature. And it's a travesty because there are so many better options for those owners than paying thousands of dollars to a relief company. And if we're engaging with those people and we're communicating with them, it gives us an opportunity to help them understand that there are better solutions available to them. So there's a lot there, but if you break it down just kind of into the five basic pieces and tackle them one by one, I think any governing body, a board of directors will, within a pretty short period of time, get a really good understanding of where they are today, and then they can begin to start understanding where they can be a year or 2 or 3 years from now.
So I guess that kind of leads into my next question was, what does a phased improvement roadmap look like? And how can it minimize both owner disruption and financial risk? And how do you come up with it?
Well, you start somewhere, and that's often the hard part. A lot of times we find ourselves just we're in the cycle. We're going, right now we're in budget season, and we're really thinking about how do we get this budget done so we can get it out to the board for review. So you have to find time to really think about that plan. And that's, I think, really the role of the management company is to help find that space and get the board and the owners thinking about all these evaluations so they can put a plan in place. And it's the only bad thing you can do is wait too long. Unfortunately, we are seeing resorts that get affected by natural disasters, as we're going to talk about. But there's just so many of these properties that are reaching either functional obsolescence physically because the infrastructure of their resort is just at a point where it doesn't make any sense to invest money into it, you're only fixing the problem in the short term, and you're not really addressing the underlying problem. Or they're financially distressed, and they're at a point where they can't replace the lost maintenance fees with rentals any longer, and just not able to keep up. So the best piece of advice I could give to anybody is start somewhere today, and at least start thinking about that roadmap of what those phases are. And the first phase is going to be fact finding, starting with title and your owners and your governing documents, and making sure you have the professional resources available to you to help you think about those things. And then from there, the roadmap can take lots of forms. There are properties that need to act immediately, right? Because they have been impacted by a natural disaster, or there's some other pressing, urgent need that needs to be addressed, or they're a little more forward thinking and they're seeing some trends. They are seeing the continued erosion of their owner base, or they're seeing other changes in their customers that they know is going to require changes down the road. And it doesn't mean they have to do a full-on change today. They don't have to terminate this year. They don't have to do anything immediately. But if they plan well now, it gives them a lot more options of what they can do a year or 2 or 3 years from now, and do it in a phased plan. And listen, there are many, many properties that are in great condition, very sustainable, have very, very engaged owner base, low delinquency rates, but they absolutely are coming up on these infrastructure reinvestment requirements, and thinking 3 or 4 years down the road about how do we make sure we've got that money set aside to do those things that may not have been in our reserve study a few years ago, because we weren't thinking about having to replace all the piping or electrical wiring and conduits in a building, and now we have to do that. So a phased approach is almost always the best outcome. It starts with fact finding, and based on the facts and where your owners feel they want to be in the short term and medium term, those will create the chapters of your book going forward.
And I guess part of this whole thing is tracking as you move forward. So what financial and operational KPIs should board members focus on when considering action?
Well, and it's a great question, and just even talking about a 5-year plan, right? So we as I said, we're in our budget cycle, and we're thinking about next year, but we really need to be thinking about it in the context of a 3 to 5 year plan. And that will include some of the things we talked about earlier, like succession planning and making sure we've got money in that 5-year plan to replace those things that we've discussed. And by having that 5-year plan in place, it gives you that ability to track, are we on target? Are we maintaining our rental income, our maintenance fee income, our ownership levels at the levels that we anticipated, or do we need to make adjustments to the plan going forward? So thinking about your reserve study, that operating plan, and that 5-year plan as all components of that same kind of financial and operational outlook allows you to have all of those KPIs, as you discussed, the number of dues paying members, the incomes, the expenses, all in a place so that you can see our assumptions holding up, not just from year to year, but over the term of that plan. There's a lot of operating performance indicators that we look at as well. As I mentioned a bit ago, we live and die by our online reviews these days, and there are some terrific tools to not only monitor those, but to collect and analyze them, to help you determine what are the factors that really are helping to create good reviews or generating poor poor reviews for you? And how can you respond to those folks? And again, that's one of those things that you may not be able to get to the level that you want overnight. One of the categories often is like room condition. And if you're in a 2 or 3 year renovation cycle, you know you're not going to get to the number that you want overnight, but you can certainly be monitoring it. So there are lots of KPIs, of metrics that we can use to put into a plan and not only look and guess of forecast where they're going from a forward-looking basis, but once we've developed that plan, we can look backwards and see if our assumptions are holding up to the test of time.
Well, it's a lot of information, and I just wanted to say that in our September 2025 edition of Resort Trades, I'd like to take this video transcript and, with your help, embellish it if as needed, and we'll have the roadmap there for people to actually follow, or even maybe work with you guys on together. So, but let's move on to our next topic, which is disaster planning. Particularly in view of the recent tragedy in Texas, that's a strong reminder of the importance to continue to review your resort's plan for handling emergencies. So what are the must-have elements of an effective emergency preparedness plan?
It really is a sobering and unfortunate reminder every time you see something like what just happened in Texas. And it's heartbreaking. And you're always asking, what could we have done better sooner? Here in Florida, we're still dealing with the effects of a couple of tough hurricane years. There are a lot of resorts on both coasts of Florida that are still closed from Irma, which was 2.5 years ago now. And then we had storms again last year that had effects throughout Florida and even up into the Carolinas. So every time it happens, it's gut wrenching. And you say, well, what could we have done better? And we ask ourselves that question all the time. And of course, the first answer is having a plan, right? We one of the things, as you said, there's a lot of information, and operating a timeshare resort or any sort of hospitality operation or any sort of operation where you have people coming and going really requires a broad range of skill sets in the management organization helping that. And one of the things that we focused on at Lemonjuice is building our facilities and risk management department. And it's specifically there to help address the facility side, the planning, the execution of the facilities work that we need to do, but also on the risk management side of making sure that we've done our disaster preparedness to the best of our ability and done training. So it does start with a plan, and there are lots of things that need to go into that plan. There are the predictable things like storms or even floods in those areas that are prone to those. Throughout the Midwest, of course, tornadoes are a big issue. Then we have the less expected things like fires and that ravaged California and Hawaii in the last couple of years. And they're not predictable, but at least you can predict that they're likely to happen in certain areas more than others. And then, of course, you have the terrible, completely unpredictable events like active shooter or something like that that's occurring at the property that couldn't have been anticipated. And a proper disaster preparedness plan has to anticipate all of those things, and thinking about even the less likely things and making sure that you've at least got a plan and thought about it. So every one of those things that I just discussed has components to it that you can research online, or you can find a risk management professional to help you think through what a plan looks like. But when I think about hurricanes, there's a couple things that come to mind. One of the things that's happened over the last few years is they've come at us faster, right? It used to be you'd kind of watch them drifting across the Atlantic, and then, you had 3 or 4 or 5 days when they thought they were headed in your direction to prepare. And that time frame has really started to shrink quite a bit. So one of the things that we've tried to build into our hurricane preparedness plans is reacting faster earlier. So rather than waiting until we're in that 4 or 5 or that 2 or 3 day cone where we really know that impact in our location is likely, if we're in that 5-day cone, so making an earlier decision, maybe a little bit less informed decision, but making the decision earlier to close the resort, to start communicating with the inbound owners and guests, and to evacuate the guests that are there, doing it further in advance gives us more time to do it. And then the other thing that we're trying to build into it is you got to remember we've got employees. So we have team members that are at these properties that we're tasking with preparing, getting everybody else, preparing the property, doing the best we can to board up, get things above ground, whatever the case may be for those particular properties. We need to make sure they have time to go and prepare their own homes and families to do that too. So having a plan, making sure that you are building enough time to react to whatever the emergency is. And then, of course, the big thing is communication. So once something is happening, people want to be kept informed. Fortunately, websites are really about the best way we can keep our owners and guests informed. So you need to have a website where the resort manager or other people in authority are able to post pretty much real-time updates about what's going on at the property, because that is the place that people will go to first to look. Yeah, they'll look through their phone. If you have texting systems set up, there's different ways to push messages to the owners, but having that website where you can go and communicate with the owners is really important. That communications also takes some time. So making sure everybody does it, but I don't think they really measure. We should be making sure that we have an email address and a cell number for every single owner in our database. Every time they call to make a reservation, every time we have an interaction with them, when they show up at the desk for whatever reason, we need to be confirming that we have an email address and a cell number on file for them, along with, of course, their regular mailing address. And it takes work to make that happen. It takes a good database to make sure that you can look and say, are we at the 80 or 90% level for those? There's still a small fraction of people that either won't or prefer not to provide an email address. People are, I think, still a little skeptical. They would want to make sure if they give you their cell phone number, it's not being used for marketing purposes. But more and more, the resorts don't have telephones in their rooms, and municipalities have allowed that with the condition that we're collecting the cell number of a occupant of that room in advance. So with our owners, we should be making sure we've got that contact information for every one of them so that we can contact them. And then, of course, for the guests and residents, we know we need to have that information too, so that we can communicate with them in real time about how we're reacting to whatever that emergency is. The third leg of the stool is really insurance, right? And when I talk about your risk management professionals, very often it can be your insurance agent. And if they really, a good insurance agent will have a very robust risk management plan. They'll know the community where you are and what those risk factors are. And they're such a great resource to go to. So making sure that you've got the right insurance in place, and there's a lot to that. There's so many definitions of water damage and how it occurs to a property, whether it's, name stormed and wind driven rain, and or due to flood, and all of those different factors. And there's so many ways to word that in both your property and flood policies. Having a professional evaluate those for you and make sure you have the proper coverages for your location in place. Again, it's something that you have to do well in advance. You can't call them on the Friday when there's a storm coming next week and upgrade your wind policy, right? So all of those things that I just discussed, of thinking about the disasters that could occur at your location, thinking about ways to communicate with your owners and guests and local municipal authorities and things of that nature, and having the right insurance and risk management plan in place are all things that start a long time before the event should occur. So it's just forward thinking, all part of that operational thinking in that 5-year plan that we talked about earlier.
Wow, absolutely. I think we might have both been working at TRICOM when I interviewed and wrote an article about a pretty robust plan from a resort in San Diego, but I'll try and find that article. But meanwhile, let's say after a storm or some event, what are some strategies to help a board balance urgent repairs with long-term financial stability?
That's a tough question. And again, that's why we combine kind of our facilities and risk management department, because those things go really hand in hand. And having resources on the ground soon after a disaster, regardless of what it is, to evaluate the physical plant and what needs to be addressed is really important. And especially if you're in an area that's been hit by a hurricane or fire and everyone's filing insurance claims, it's really helpful to be at the front of the line rather than the back of the line. So that facilities evaluation, knowing how that has affected team members too, is critical in that short aftermath, because those team members, if they're reeling because their home was affected and may not be available to help, keeping in touch with all of that in those early hours right after the event is so important. And then again, when you talk with your insurance risk management provider, you talk to them about the adjustment process. If we have a storm, what's the best way to get an adjuster in here? Do I go to a public adjuster? Does your agency have an adjustment department that we should know and go to? So knowing how to evaluate and then start adjudicating those claims as soon after the event as possible is going to be the key to figuring out where you are. If you're open, all right, great. What are we going to do to clean up and improve? If we're shut down, then what's it really going to take to us to get to a point where we can reopen, if that's going to be the case, or to figure out another direction if there was too much damage to be addressed. So those first couple of days right after are super important to take stock and to take action.
Right. So all of this requiring owner communications, and I've heard a lot actually about Lemonjuice's owner communications. So can you describe how you guys work?
Well, you have to use all the arrows in the quiver, right? And I think we use technology well to do our electronic communications and find out how owners want to be communicated with, and then make sure we're over communicating a little bit. So even when people have opted for digital communications or digital billing or digital voting, we're still going to make sure perhaps once a year to get a written newsletter out to them, make sure we've got a good address and things of that nature, and continue to monitor. So making sure we've got that contact information, and then knowing how the customer or owner wants to be communicated with is really important. And of course, the things like using Zoom or Teams or a platform like this for a town hall is really, really helpful. As we've always, as you know, as far back from our days at Tricom, the board meeting was always an important business meeting for the board of directors, but it was open to the owners for them to come in and hear about the governance of their resort and to ask questions and encouraged to do so. And doing these board meetings on Zoom, even if we're doing them in person, allowing those owners to participate and ask their questions and put their questions into the chat and things of that nature, really gets those folks more engaged and more likely to attend if you do have an informational meeting or a town hall meeting or something like that. So we talked about websites are a critical piece. They need to be updated. They need to be ADA compliant. That's an important characteristic, but they need to be dynamic so that somebody can go in and provide updates. When we're doing one of our resort reimagination processes, we'll set up a dedicated information website for those owners where they can go for specific information about their particular process, so that it's more than just a public-facing website with maybe an owner's page, but it's really specific to the process. So all of those ways to communicate are important. It's still great, too, when we are able to get people together in a room. We talk about this a lot in business, of course, as we've gone to a more virtual work environment. Every time we're able to get people together in a room, everyone's realizes how much they miss that camaraderie and that ability to just talk and hear what's going on. And that comes into play too, Sharon, even with the owners. So yeah, virtual meetings are cheaper. They're easier for people to attend, but there's still nothing wrong with holding a good old fashioned annual meeting and making it a fun event that people like to come and attend. So keep the people engaged, and they'll tell you how they want to be engaged.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, Scott, thank you. You've really given us a whole Bible on how to outline on great ideas. And so I would remind our viewers that we will post a digital edition of the September 2025 on resorttrades.com. So if you need to have a record of what Scott's been discussing, look for that September issue. And you can also email me, Sharon at sharoninc.com. You can email me to be put on our mailing list. It's just all free. Everything is free. So thank you to our viewer, and please help support this effort to connect one another and form our industry community. I think it's very important. Go to resorttrades.com and sign up for our e-newsletter. It's called an e-magazine on there, and subscribe. It's free too. So, Scott, thank you very much for your time today and for being one of Resort Trades' star supporters. And I will show you the latest Lemonjuice commercial. It's the least I can do, Scott.
Thank you, Sharon, for that. And listen, I really appreciate the opportunity to connect with you again and with your viewers and listeners. So thank you for the time too.
Well, thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.